Welcome back from me, Susan Sharpe, to our music programmes on Radio 3. Time now for our weekly exploration of the BBC Sound Archive, Mining the Archive. Scarlatti's Sonata La Pastorale, played there by the subject of this week's Mining the Archive, the Italian pianist Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli. Michelangeli died a year ago this week at the age of 75, after a number of years of fairly indifferent health. He leaves behind him a mere handful of commercial recordings, notably discs of Debussy and Chopin, and an all-time classic of the gramophone, his 1957 recording of the Rachmaninoff Fourth and Ravel G Major piano concertos. For its part, the BBC archive possesses valuable Michelangeli recordings dating back to 1957, and including works which represent the cornerstones of the solo and piano concerto repertory: Beethoven's Opus 111 Sonata, Chopin's B-flat minor Sonata, Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit and G Major Concerto, and Debussy's First Book of Preludes. Over the next couple of weeks, I'll be dipping into the archive and playing some of the earlier of the BBC's Michelangeli recordings. Michelangeli's all too infrequent recital and concert appearances were red-letter days for all piano fanciers who packed into the Royal Festival and later the Barbican halls. And amongst the throng was always a goodly collection of Michelangeli's fellow pianists who'd come to see the extraordinary man behind the myth, and to revel in his apparently inexhaustible range of tone colours and marvel at the clarity of his articulation. Some claimed that Michelangeli's technique had become an end in itself, that the music had been stripped of its poetic heart, while for others, Michelangeli's style represented something new, something somehow ideally suited to the post-war, post-romantic world of the second half of the 20th century. We'll begin our quest for the Michelangeli legacy with a commercial recording made soon after the war, his breathtaking performance of Brahms' variations on a theme by Paganini. Brahms' Variations on a Theme by Paganini, recorded in London in 1948 by Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli. Legend has it that after a suitable time for his warm-up, Michelangeli sat down at the piano in his unusually low position and recorded that performance in a single take. After he'd finished, he got up, put his coat on and made for the door, only to be intercepted by a sound engineer who was worried about the sound balance at one place. With his customary shrug, Michelangeli returned to the piano, the tape rolled again, and he played the whole work exactly as he had done the previous time, and the reading that we've just heard is one or other of these unedited takes. Well, this story is just an innocent example of the kind of legend that's grown up around Michelangeli. With his demonic manner and his cadaverous appearance on stage, he had an almost Faustian demeanour and an aura of nearly religious mystique. Rumour had it that he'd been a fighter ace in the Italian Air Force, that he'd worked for the anti-fascist resistance movement, that he was a champion racing driver, that he'd qualified as a doctor, and even that he could trace his ancestry back to St. Francis of Assisi. To help me unravel the mystery, the enigma that was Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli, I spoke with two people who in their own ways know as much about him as anybody. His family friend and pupil for 8 years, the London-based pianist and teacher Noretta Conci, and the Milanese pianist Carlo Palesi, who's recently had a major part in organising an important Michelangeli exhibition in the pianist's native town of Brescia, a task which involved him in scores of interviews with Michelangeli's friends, helpers and colleagues. Our journey begins some 10 years before Michelangeli recorded the Brahms Paganini variations we've just heard, and in a country whose landscape's rather different from the hills and mountains around Brescia. It was in 1938 that Michelangeli first achieved some sort of official international recognition, when he came 7th in the Queen Elizabeth competition in Brussels. Well, this may sound like a very modest start to a career, but it's worth remembering that Michelangeli was 18 and at least 5 years younger than any of his fellow competitors. He'd put down a useful marker and impressed the jury with his exceptional control of sonority and his extraordinary keyboard facility. It was in the following year, 1939, that the decisive break came, when Michelangeli stunned an impressive international jury, including both Paderewski and Alfred Cortot, at the Geneva competition, which was then one of a mere half-dozen or so important competitions worldwide. Michelangeli's win in Geneva was decisive and clear-cut, and Alfred Cortot, whose own style of piano playing was light years away from that of this young North Italian, declared, famously and imaginatively, "A new Liszt is born." Here was a 19-year-old Italian to outshine the finest products of the hothouse conservatoires of Vienna, Berlin, Paris and Moscow. Carlo Palesi took me through the various stages in Michelangeli's early career.
I would say that, the background of Michelangeli's studies was completely Italian. I mean, he was completely Italian school because he had studied when he was a little child, since when he was 5 or 6, in Brescia, his town, with Paolo Chimeri, who was an old teacher then living there. And there he studied in a little music school was called Liceo Venturi, and there he had his first performances when he was a little baby, let's say 7 years, 8 years. After that, he was noticed and he was sent to a school in Milano of Giovanni Anfossi, who was another very important Italian teacher, a completely Italian school, I mean. And he was an important teacher because he applied the new theories coming from Breithaupt. He was an important German teacher about the use of weight on playing on a grand piano keyboard. We should say that musically he is completely a product of the Italian school.
Can you just describe what you would say was the Italian tradition?
Well, Italian tradition in music, in piano, is not a very old one, because you know that the roots of a tradition in 19th century is on opera. And there was an important school which was from Naples. Thalberg, who was a pupil of Liszt, went to live in Naples and there founded a big school. So let's say that the roots are not properly Italians, but there was some tendency to mediate, which the one was the cantability, the singing style of Italian opera, with a new technique, the technique of the piano.
But so this connection with Liszt, so it was very apposite that Cotto said, there's a new Liszt here when he won that competition.
Yeah, because you know that what maybe should have strike people when Liszt played was the powerful control he had of the keyboard. And was an impression of somebody who was not in the humankind, something
superhuman.
Superhuman. And I think Michelangeli should make people think sort of the same thing. And he said he's born a new Liszt, not a new Chopin or a new Busoni, but a new Liszt because it's something to point out the stunning way of playing he had.
And Michelangeli looked a little bit like Liszt, didn't he? Really?
Well,
his long hair and. Well, slightly demonic?
Yeah, I think in the later years he had this kind of look because he had, as you told, long hair, like a little bit this kind of images of Liszt when he had already taken the vows. And that's sort of an image.
Yeah. Well, that competition was 1939.
Yeah, 1939.
So he was all set for a wonderful career, and then the war came.
Yeah, the war came, but
so then what happened?
I think he was lucky because he had been very much appreciated during the concerts following this big competition and this is a story. I mean, maybe it's true. I mean, it's true that the Princess Maria José of Piemonte, listened to him. She was very powerful. And gossip says, he had the possibility, to go under the army, but without going to the war, because he continued keeping concerts all over Italy. And there are also something important things about repertoire I can point out about this earlier.
But also in the war, just before we get to that, there is a story that he fought as a fighter pilot, and also that later on he was in the resistance.
Well,
that true?
Nobody can confirm that. I can't say it's true or it's not true, but I don't think he was a pilot. Nobody knows something about that. Everybody knows this story, but nobody knows it's true,
Yes.
But actually, I think he didn't take part to the war. And we know that he was imprisoned one day because there was, after the 8th of September, 1944, he was one night in jail with a friend and pupil of his, Vincenzo Pertile, who I had the possibility to interview, but no more. I think maybe this is one of the only participation in the act of war.
Yes. Well, you were just about to mention the sort of repertoire that Michelangeli was playing around this time.
Well, this is a very important point. We see that in the first years, to my opinion, he had all the right papers to show himself as a big virtuoso, because there are some pieces like Islamey by Balakirev, in example, or Danse Russe, the last movement of 3 movements of Petrushka by Stravinsky, and a couple of preludes of Rachmaninoff, which are very one-self show pieces just to show virtuosity. There's something else. I mean, but this means that he was very sensible to the possibility of catching the public. And 42, 43, there was already sort of a Michelangeli mania. and people went crazy for Michelangelo's concerts.
And wasn't he playing quite a lot of Baroque music at that time?
Yeah. He was playing a lot of Baroque music. In example, he played Bach. He played Concerto Italiano by Bach, and a lot of cembalist composers like Grazioli, Galuppi, Scarlatti. He loved that music because he had possibility to show his marvelous, stunning control of sonorities and of sound plans.
And Mozart was quite unusual then, wasn't it? And Clementi.
Yeah, Clementi. He played Clementi. And this is a very important point because he thought, like a lot of musicologists now have to admit, that in the developing of piano instrumental setting are very important works of Clementi. Because, in Clementi we find all the important points of new technique. We should say that Beethoven took much more, pianistically talking, from Clementi than from Mozart or Haydn.
Well, Maestro Palesi, let's hear one of the works by Clementi which Michelangeli championed. Here he is in a 1957 performance of the Sonata No. 2 in B-flat. It was recorded just a few yards away from where I'm sitting, in the intimate surroundings of the Concert Hall of Broadcasting House here in London. The Sonata No. 2 in B-flat by the Italian-born but later London-based composer and piano manufacturer Maurizio Clementi. In Mining the Archive so far today, we've heard quite a bit from Carlo Palese about Michelangeli the pianist, but we're still not much closer to unravelling the mysteries of Michelangeli the man. To help me do this, I paid a visit to Noreta Conci. She was a close friend throughout the 1950s. We started our conversation by looking at one of her lovely photographs of Michelangeli, which were taken by a local photographer who also happened to direct the local choir. This was a photograph taken, I imagined, in 1957.
This is when his father died, and there is a convent near Arezzo where he used to have his master classes in the summer every August for many, many years, like 10 or 12 years. And his best friend, most loved friend, was Padre Vigilio.
And here he is with the Padre.
And here he is with Padre Vigilio, and he used to take us out up there in turns and introduce us to Padre Vigilio. And he was really a mystic sort of figure, and he loved to go there. And
Michelangeli was a mystic.
Michelangeli was a mystic figure, I think, very much so, yes.
And he used to like to go up and be quiet.
That's right, be quiet and have long talks and long walks with Padre Vigilio.
He looks here, obviously, because his father had recently died, but he looks sad. Was he?
Yes, he was.
And was he...
By nature, he was really quite a sad sort of person. Although he loved to play ping pong or drive in the car or playing cards or to go for walks, etc. He was very good in playing. Whatever he did, he did it remarkably professionally, but I cannot say that he was a happy sort of figure, except possibly when he was playing and when he was teaching, of course.
Did he suffer from depression? Was he a sort of...
No, I wouldn't say that. He was just...
Very melancholy.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good word, yes.
You mentioned his driving. That was a real passion of his, wasn't it?
It was a great
passion. Tell me about
that. Well, he used to have these extraordinary racing cars, mostly Ferraris. In fact, all Ferraris. In my days, it was only Ferrari that he drove, and he drove at great speed and with a talent. He even told us, and I can't vouch for it exactly, but he told us that he participated to the Mille Miglia. Probably that was before I knew him, but I quite believe he did, because he was incredible.
Did he spend a long time fine-tuning his engine?
Not really. He spent much more time tuning his piano, underneath his piano. And
I'd heard that he worried as much about the cylinders of his Ferraris as he did almost about the tuning of his pianos.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think that the piano had priority, absolutely. He would whiz out with his incredible, noisy Ferrari and would come up to our summer house, which is 1,000 meters high.
There's a picture here.
And we have, on this particular occasion...
he's being very sociable here.
Yes, I managed to get the whole Coro della SAT, Società Alpinisti Trentini, about 20 gentlemen, which...
a male voice choir, in fact.
Male voice choir, that's right, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he absolutely loved what they did, and so much so that he offered to harmonize a few songs, and they, of course, loved it all, and they indeed recorded it eventually.
Well, I think we must hear one.
It would be fun.
Which one shall we have?
Well, I thought perhaps La Brandolina and Lucia Maria.
Right, and
there are two
what
Piemontesi songs.
sia poi impreccato, come fa Roma felicità, quanto sia poi impreccato, come fa Roma felicità. Come fa Roma fe la cugia, la guardiana brandolina, bella nell'andare latina, la bella branda, la violina, la bella branda, la viola, quanca l'abbia poi cugia, come fa Roma fe la cugia, quanca l'abbia poi cugia, come fa Roma fe la cugia.
A comic ballad from Turin about a bride who's presented with a cask of wine instead of a ring, and Lucia Maria, a comic riddle about three young girls. They were sung there, on Noreta Conci's much-played record, by the Società Alpinisti Tridentini. The novel and highly pianistic harmonizations were by Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli, the subject of this and next week's Mining the Archive. An important area of Michelangeli's activities as a pianist was his teaching. It seems to have assumed for him the nature of a vocation, an act of love even. All his pupils, Maurizio Pollini, Marta Argerich and Jörg Demus amongst them, testified to the fact that he refused ever to accept any money from a pupil. "Let the public pay to hear me play," he'd declare, as he embarked on another grueling month's teaching at his famous classes in Arezzo.
He usually had about 16 to 20 students, according to the number of pianoforti that he had in this beautiful palazzo that he would have put at his disposal. And we had each one room and one piano, and the schedule was like that. 6 of us, or 8 or 10, according to the number of piano, would start practicing at 8 o'clock in the morning until 12. Then the next slot would come at 12, from 12 to 4, and then us again from 4 to midnight, from 4 to 8, sorry. And then the second lot from 8 to midnight. Now, he would never tell us when he would give us a lesson. He would just come into the room, so we better practice 8 hours without interruption, because he could walk in at any time, at any hour of day or night.
What would he say if you weren't actually at the piano when he walked in?
Oh, but we were. We made sure we were. But he would come in and say, you do it all wrong, or that's not the way to practice, and do it slowly and articulated and whatever. And then he would go out again, and obviously he would come in and say, now you're ready for lesson, come with me. And then we would go into his beautiful room with his magnificent piano, and we would have a lesson that could last 10 minutes or 4 hours.
And how was he as a teacher?
Well, he used to say, I didn't invent any system of teaching, and it was quite true. He didn't have a particular school, like you could say the Russian school or such and such, the French school. He didn't have any of these. He used to say that everything that one looks for is in the score. The only problem is to know how to read the score, and he used to help us to a very rigorous reading of such score. Now, each composer and each score has his own truth, and of course, the more familiar you make yourself with the composer, the more you learn from the other scores, and that is what he was trying to make us understand. The other thing that he used to say, apart from this absolute loyalty to the text, was that the ear is the supreme judge of the interpretation, and he used to make us either look in that corner and play and listen as if somebody else was playing, or close our eyes and just listen to our sound and what we were able to produce.
What was it like playing for him?
Terrifying. Terrifying, because he really didn't say very much. He would walk up and down, and you could play for a long, long time without him saying a word. And then he would stop, and he would make us start again and play perhaps 2 bars. And I may tell you that one time when I brought him Schumann Papillon, and I was about to start playing, and I was halfway up in the air, and he said troppo forte, and that of course scared me already, because I didn't even play a note. And on that beginning of that Schumann Papillon, we may easily have stayed an hour, just how to approach that first note. But he wouldn't tell me how to do it. We had to find it for ourselves. And when finally we produced the sound that he wanted, he would just say ecco, which means that's it. And at that point started our trouble, because we thought, what did I do? I mean, I must have done something okay this time, but how to reproduce it again? And he was so patient.
Loretta Conci's remarks about Michelangeli's extraordinary patience and fastidiousness in matters of touch and tonal weight are borne out by Maurizio Pollini. He spent a year studying with Michelangeli shortly after winning the 1961 Warsaw competition, and he remembers well Michelangeli's approach to the opening of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata.
He said about the possibility to play it as soft as possible, really as pianissimo, as indicated by Beethoven, and so difficult to do in this register of the piano, in the bass register, where the piano is unfortunately very loud. And using the mechanic of the piano in a certain way, played in a certain way, it was without, absolutely not staccato, but very near to the keyboard, to obtain this mysterious effect that certainly Beethoven wanted. I think he's a great artist, and it is certainly one of the pianists who were able to play the piano in the most perfect and beautiful, fantastic way. This is for sure about Michelangelo. This is the peak of piano playing, together with Horowitz and to very few other people. Everybody knows about his way to playing Ravel, his performance of Gaspard de la Nuit. I think nobody else played better.
Maurizio Pollini. Well, let's hear the master himself in Gaspard de la Nuit. Here's a performance which Michelangeli broadcast live on the BBC Home Service on the night of Tuesday, the 30th of June, 1959. Arturo Michelangeli recorded live in the BBC Concert Hall in Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit. It's a work like the G major concerto which ideally suited what one critic dubbed Michelangeli's seismographic gradations of colour and touch and his mesmeric powers of concentration. Well, we move on now to a more controversial area of Michelangeli's repertoire, his playing of Chopin. It was in this area that charges were laid against him of unidiomatic distortions and an inability to come to terms with Chopin's Polish roots. These charges are perhaps a bit unfair. Michelangeli had, after all, been chosen in 1949 as the official pianist for the celebrations to mark the centenary of Chopin's death. Two things seem to have distressed his critics most of all. The first was the Italian's apparent coolness, what someone grandly called his poise, which is akin to emotion recollected in tranquillity. The second complaint was the strange way Michelangeli used an old-fashioned device, the technique known as desynchronization of the hands. Carlo Palesi explains the thinking behind this.
This was a normal mean of expression of the old romantic pianists, but he didn't use it to create, a passionate effect. And that's important because we can really appreciate the way in which he could do it with a neoclassic effect, in a very, very clear effect. And if you listen to Berceuse by Chopin, played by him, we found this unsynchronicity, but it's something very, not very passionate.
Was his playing sometimes too perfect?
Well, I mean, when you hear somebody who really keeps count of everything, you run the risk of thinking he's cold. And there are a lot of ways, a lot of levels at which you can play what is written. And so if you read at this deep level of consciousness and with his professional conscience he had, you had to find that there are a lot of sound plans, there are a lot of things written in the phrasing, and you are forced to have something really perfect, really controlled in every part. I mean, you can't hear Michelangeli, doing something else, chatting, or because you have to really to understand what he's doing in the little parts, in the particulars of the music. So you will understand that everything is the fruit of a very deep artistic and musical personality. I mean, if you listen to Arthur Rubinstein, who has been a great pianist, a great artist, but he's sort of, somebody who has got to catch the public till the first note, somebody who breathes with the public. Michelangeli was somebody who was there, like in Paradise, staying in another planet and, taking out of the piano the deep meaning of music and what he could read on the music. That's why maybe you can feel, or somebody can feel, a certain distance between him and the public. But I think it's something which doesn't involve the real essence of music.
Michelangeli in his explorative, almost otherworldly account of Chopin's Berceuse in D major, Opus 57. That recording, which is available commercially, was made in Italy in 1942. In later years, it seems that Michelangeli became increasingly reluctant to exchange his customary black polo neck for his evening tails, which he referred to as his tuta, or work overalls. This reluctance to appear doesn't seem to have affected him in 1957, a season which, for London audiences at least, was arguably his finest of all. He made that now legendary Rachmaninoff-Ravel concerto disc with the Philharmonia Orchestra. He performed Liszt and Beethoven concertos with Sir Malcolm Sargent. He gave a spellbinding recital at the Royal Festival Hall, soon to be released on CD, by the way. And he also found time to come into the BBC studios. In 2 one-hour sessions, he set down 2 of Schumann's most demanding scores, Carneval and Faschingsschwank aus Wien, or Carnival Jest from Vienna, with which we end today's programme. According to the original contract, the BBC paid him the sum of 225 guineas, inclusive. Quite a tidy sum in those days. It might not have bought him a new Ferrari, but 225 guineas would certainly have furnished Michelangeli with a brand new Morris Oxford. But somehow, I can't quite picture him driving one of those.